Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to another incredible day here at the Island of Hope, the Island Stage. As we heard, my name is Stacey Alvarez de la Campa. I'm the Program and Partnerships Manager here at Island Innovation. So today we're going to have a wonderful fireside chat with Professor Francesco Sindico of the University of Strathclyde Law School. Professor Sindico is also the co-chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. And he's going to be focusing today on presenting the interim results of a project co-produced with the Government of Vanuatu. So I'll take a seat and I'll leave it to you. Would you like to tell us a bit more about the project, Francesco?
Yes, thank you very much, Stacey. And first of all, huge thanks to Island Innovation, to those in the room, to those online. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today, Stacey. Delighted to say a few words about the project. As often happens, people come with 3 hats, so by the end of the day you'll be tired of me. This is the first of 3 times that I'll be on stage. But this time my hat is with IUCN, WCL. That acronym stands for International Union for the Conservation of Nature, World Commission on Environmental Law. And I think it's important to clarify what this WCL is. So IUCN has been there for 75 years. It's a leading hybrid organization, and by that it means that it has member states but also non-state members. It has been very active in the development of incredible things in international environmental relations, international environmental governance, and is very much also at the heart of the negotiations in the Blue Zone. Many commissions are part of IUCN, one of which is WCL, World Commission on Environmental Law. This is a network of over 1,000 legal experts, and I have the pleasure of being the co-chair of the Climate Change Law Specialist Group, a group of over 400 legal experts from private sector, international organizations, governments, academia, and civil society. It's a volunteer network, but very powerful, very capable, and very far-reaching. It is through this network that we have developed this project called Islands, Nature, and Renewable Energy Law Project. Let me be very clear about what this project is not. It's not an academic project. I am an academic, but it's not an academic project in the sense that it is not something that it's only research for the sake of research that will go into only research journals, articles, and so forth. It will also do that at some point, but what it wants to do is to work very closely with government, climate change, and energy-related stakeholders to address questions that they want answers to, not me. They want answers to. And through the power and the leverage of IUCN and our networks, we provide such answers, including policy recommendations. I think it's important to point that out because it is really in collaboration that we can do this project. We started with one island nation, with the Government of Vanuatu, with which we have very strong contacts also with my other hat, which is Scottish Government. And in a nutshell, what we want to do is explore the regulatory barriers to the penetration of renewable energy within island nations. You all know that many island nations, island communities as well, have very ambitious targets. 2030, 100% renewable energy and electricity, and so forth. But one thing is to put it on a pledge. One thing is to actually create not just a financial and social environment, but also the legal framework and the regulatory environment that actually allows this incredible ambitious pledge to be met. But in addition to that, because we are IUCN and because of what we can bring to the floor, we want to look at regulatory practice that at the same time not only don't undermine, but potentially even promote marine and land biodiversity. So, we are working with, in particular, a number of members of the network, in particular, Madeleine Taylor from Macquarie University, Romain Majeur, now based in Cáceres in Spain, and previously based in Groningen. But again, the key partner is the Government of Vanuatu. We have worked with them to identify a number of questions, and we now have 4 policy briefs that are available online And we will share that website with you as soon as we can. The initial findings, if you want, are that there is a need to better understand the grid and off-grid reality in some islands. So Vanuatu is an archipelago of over 80 islands, 330,000 people live there. There are some islands that are, if you want, almost like a mainland, and then you have a number of other islands. In the Caribbean, you could think, for example, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have St. Vincent that could almost operate as a mainland, and then the Grenadines as the outer islands. The energy landscape, the regulatory landscape may well change depending on where you are. Also, other aspects that we have been looking at are that the regulations to provide that, not just energy security, but also financial security, such as power purchase agreements or feed-in tariffs, that needs to be ironed out. And it really needs to be done in a way that it doesn't just attract investors, but it also promotes that healthy environment to nature, both marine and land. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll give you the floor again, is that we're very interested, and this builds also on my own experience in Scotland with the Scottish Government and the islands in Scotland. None of this is relevant if you don't put people at the heart of it. So when you develop regulations, when you develop frameworks to promote renewable energy within an island nation, within an island community, because Vanuatu has different islands, different realities, it's important to get that buy-in, but not just for the sake of buy-in, because that's how actually renewable energy will deliver those win-win promises that it wants to.
Thanks so much for that, Francesco. It's great that you highlighted the holistic nature of it. We have heard a lot about the financial aspect. You've brought in the social aspect. That legal regulatory framework kind of pulls everything together. So we appreciate that highlight. So, I mean, another question beyond all that, beyond this project, beyond the IUCN project, how else are islands advancing climate action through law specifically?
Yes, this takes us to a number of areas. And I'm sure here at the Island of Hope stage you have already talked about it, you will be talking about it, you talk it in the corridors and so forth. Let me maybe share 2 or 3 aspects where I believe that islands are very much at the forefront of the international climate agenda from a legal perspective. So clearly, the first one, and it's been highlighted in the media everywhere, is obviously loss and damage. So loss and damage was on the horizon for decades. It got a lot of momentum 2 years ago in Glasgow. Sharm el-Sheikh seemed to really push in the right direction, and now we actually have a fund that is operational. Whether the money will be enough, how it will be disbursed, we can have all the conversations you want. But it goes without saying that had it not been for the leadership of island nations, of the AOSIS, of the LDC group with a lot of islands, loss and damage fund would have never existed. So that's important. But now the legal framework of that fund becomes crucial. We all know that there's been a lot of criticism that rather than having an ad hoc secretariat with specific rules for how to disburse the loss and damage, it's now apparently going to be headed, at least provisionally, within the World Bank. Nothing against the World Bank, but there had been some criticism towards that. So the legal frameworks of how and when the loss and damage will be disbursed will be something where the law has also something to say. That's the first thing. The second aspect that I would like to highlight, and it does link to the negotiations as well, is the possibility of a treaty to eliminate and to navigate down, if you want to call it, the use of fossil fuels. Again, we know there's a number of island nations, especially in the Pacific, that are pushing this idea. Had you asked me 3-4 years ago, is this even a possibility? I'd say, this is a pipe dream, this will never even happen. But you know what? I would have said the same thing 5-10 years ago about the third element that I'll say, which is about the International Court of Justice. So actually, the fact that a group of like-minded nations, mainly island, but very recently it appears that a country like Colombia has stated its support towards the idea of a treaty to phase out, not down, phase out the use of fossil fuels, is an incredible piece of news. However, it's media attention. People will go frenzy because of it. It will reach the media. We're talking about a treaty. Hence, whether you like them or not, international lawyers will start playing a role. And I do think, again, that's where the international law element can come in very, very strongly. That would be amazing. And it highlights how over the past years, the efforts that have been happening at the negotiations in the blue zone are parallel. There's a parallel stream of legal efforts elsewhere. One of them being this negotiation, this discussion about the possibility of an actual treaty that may do what the negotiations are not doing. The third thing is the International Court of Justice. Again, most of you will know what it is, but just to recap very briefly, this is the highest judicial body of the world. There's nothing over it. Having said that, I have heard people asking, well, but if we don't like the decision of the ICJ, where do we go to appeal? I'm really afraid to disappoint you. You don't go anywhere. There's no such thing as an appeal to the ICJ. But that does give you an idea of how important this court is. And as most of us will know, the government of Vanuatu has spearheaded an international campaign to bring a specific question that needs answers, clarification on what states have to do, state obligations to protect the climate system, what are the legal consequences, what happens to those states if they cause significant harm to the climate system, to the ICJ. And I'm really excited to see what happens there. I have the privilege, so feel free to ask me more questions, but I have the privilege to work very closely with IUCN, again, in these proceedings. So IUCN is the only not fully governmental organization that has been allowed to present its written submissions and oral statements before the ICJ. So it's something I'm very much involved, but it's definitely something that islands have driven forward and not others.
That is really heartening to hear, because we know that there's the use of that terminology, small island developed states, and a lot of us in the room and during this COP have tried to move away from that to talk about large ocean states in order to signify the language of empowerment really is meant to reflect what is actually happening. So what you have just outlined really does speak to the power of island nations and our potential to create change and to initiate change. So we really appreciate that. Can you tell us a bit more about the ICJ and the involvement that you've had in terms of the IUCN?
So first, maybe a word about the large oceanic states, because I also started using that word. I like it. I do, however, think we have to be a bit careful. Because if you think about it, the United Kingdom could be a massive large oceanic state, but it's definitely not a SIDS. So, it's just words, but at the same time, we need to just be a bit careful. Australia is a large oceanic state. Is it a SIDS? Probably not. So we just have to be a bit careful why we are using specific. There is a reason why SIDS came. There is a reason why they're called small island developing states. There's a reason not to call them, but let's also be very careful what we use and why. Now, going back to the ICJ. A lot of people will ask, what's the big fuss? Okay? So, yes, it may well be the highest court of the world, but it's not a situation where a large oceanic state is suing the Czech Republic or Canada and wants compensation. It's not about that. It's not even a situation like in a domestic state where you go to court, you win, and the decision is enforced, because I'm sorry to say international law usually doesn't operate like that. So what is the big deal? The big deal is that it runs parallel to the negotiations. The negotiations are going okay, let's say like that, but it goes without saying that over the last years and years and years, and it's not the negotiations' fault, the negotiators actually are working incredibly long hours, not just these 2 weeks, but all throughout the year, but they are part of a wider international political process that we are all fully aware of. So what the ICJ could do, and I highlight could do, is the fact that it may lay the foundations for A, stronger cooperation going forward, and B, clear rules that if there is a dispute in the future between, say, a large oceanic state and Canada, just to say a name, those legal counsel, those government officials can look at that advisory opinion of the ICJ and have much more legal ammunition to defend the interests of their large oceanic state. So it actually is a big deal. It will be a little bit of a circus, let's be honest. Not as big as the big circus there in the blue zone, that's a whole other thing. But it will be, there will be probably 100, if not more, states that will want to present before the 20 judges before the ICJ in The Hague. There will be media attention, there will be everything. But it is something that, and also, you have a one shot to this. I think this is very important to understand. Advisory opinions don't come in a cycle. It's not like COPs every year. This is going to be once in our lifetime, and we need to make the most out of it. And that's why even at the IUCN, we're working so hard to get every single word right.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that from a legal perspective, the power of language to really outline exactly what is meant to be addressed, I think is important for us to bear in mind. So I want to bring it back to the project with the Government of Vanuatu and just ask you, as just some closing words of wisdom. Do you think there are any lessons that other island jurisdictions can learn from, how this project was embarked on and how they can kind of tie into this, the learnings and the lessons?
Thank you very much. 2 words on this. So every island is different, even within Vanuatu. So it would be foolish for me to say what works in Vanuatu will work elsewhere. Having said that, there is an islandness that resonates, and good practices can be shared, stories can be heard, and insights can be taken. So there definitely is value in the comparative aspect. But what we are keen to do going forward is to expand the reach of our project and follow the same methodology, if you want. And the methodology is relatively simple, it's not a big deal. It's about listening to the government, to the energy and climate change stakeholders of that specific island nation or island community with which we want to work, understand which questions they want answered, create a group of experts that has the capacity and the network within that island to be able to do such work. But then the most important thing is to develop such a relationship with the users that that policy brief, that web page that you will be shared with, does not just stay online and nobody sees it, doesn't go on a shelf and nobody uses it. We actually then have a phase 2, if you want, where we engage with the island nation. We explain the nuts and bolts of the policy brief. We disseminate it to those in the island, be it online or in person, that they want us to explain it to. And then it's not for us, they take it forward as they consider. The biggest challenge, as often happens, is that, and I go back to what WCL is. WCL is a network of volunteers. Now, the volunteers are in a privileged position because we do have a job, so we work at the university, but within WCL I'm a volunteer. So this first phase of the project has been volunteer-driven. There have been universities like Groningen that have allowed students during their credit-bearing formation to contribute. But for this project to move forward in a more professional way, in a more impactful way, it obviously needs funding. And that COP, we are doing two things. We are reaching out to potential funders, be those development organizations, philanthropic organizations, and so forth. And we're also having conversations with other island nations to see the extent to which they may be interested, or island communities. So it goes without saying that if in the room or if online, once you have the opportunity to review the webpage, you may be interested, please reach out to me and I will be delighted to talk to you.
With that, thank you so much, Professor Francesco Sindico, the co-chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. We will be putting that link up on the screen for you to see. Please take the time to take a look at the policy briefs and explore what's there. So thank you again for this morning.